Hello you guys, it's me, Uniquely Me Resin, coming back to attempt to re-record the resin safety 101 class that I tried to do last night. But I want to go over some safety tips to try to help you guys out with doing resin, epoxy resin or UV resin or whatever kind of resin safely. Because it can be fun, but it would be very beneficial if you would do it safely. So without further ado, I just wanted to go in and start by saying, if you guys don't know what epoxy resin is, it is a thermal setting plastic, meaning it forms a irreversible chemical bond during the curing process. I did do the Google research on that because I wanted to know what chemicals were epoxy made of. So I just took the initiatives to find out what that had meant. So the different types of epoxy resins are coatings, which you can use to coat tumblers, coasters, artwork, glossy protective finishes, also molds, jewelry, keychains, resin art with flakes and colorants like alcohol, ink, or mica powder. Adhesives, you can also use epoxy resin for strong two-part glue adhesives for decorations and charms. And a fun fact about that, Home Depot has a two-part epoxy glue. I had no idea they had that, but it's called Gorilla Epoxy, and it will run you anywhere between $5 to $6. So if you guys want to know where to get some epoxy glue, go to Home Depot. But please don't pour epoxy resin down any kind of pipes. It can destroy your pipelines and all that, but we'll get back into that a little later. I really want to talk about what is PPE. If you guys don't know what PPE is, it is personal protection equipment. Is what you would use to keep yourself and your workspace safe. So first example is your eye protection. It would help you beneficially, say for instance you're mixing resin and it splashes. You don't want it to get on your clothing or your eyes, so you would wear protective goggles or any kind of eyewear to help you not get that in your eyes when you're mixing resin. Also, when you're demolding, sometimes there are dry resin pieces on the mold, so when you're demolding, the little pieces of resin fly everywhere and it could just so happen to pop in your eye, and you don't want that. So try not to have your eyes around that when you're doing such. The second example will be your respiratory mask. Show you guys what that looks like. Nope, I do not have it. Okay, well I took it back to my craft room, but it's literally a mask. It looks like a hazmat mask, but it has a cartridge or a what do you call it? A cartridge or a filter. The filters. Mine just has one cartridge filter that's like right there in the middle. Some of them have two. If you cannot afford a respiratory mask, you can just use the little face masks. Any kind of protection for your lungs. It is very beneficial to wear a respiratory mask because the chemicals in the epoxy resin, UV resin, any kind of resin is very harmful to your lungs. And if you inhale the epoxy resin, it can destroy your lungs over time. You can get things like dermatitis or skin allergens or allergic reactions to said resin irritants. Okay, so the next one would be, well, always wear your respiratory mask. Okay, and if you can't, just go outside where there's fresh air. Also, ventilation, we'll talk about that in a few. Nitrile gloves, those are the best option. Don't handle uncured resin without gloves. The reason why that is because sometimes if you keep the gloves on for a long period of time, they can irritate your skin. That's why you should always swap them out just so often. And a tip that I learned from my friend Whatnot Basement Brats, is to layer your gloves, like 3 pair. So once you try not to contaminate your resin versus your colorants or your micro powders and just getting resin all over the place. So once you take off a layer, there's another pair of gloves that you can use to touch on other things other than the resin. With the nitrile gloves, you want to try to use the blue and the black gloves for UV resin to keep the radiation of the light off, because UV resin uses a UV light. It's like the sun rays light in the little tool. So you want to try to use the black or the blue to retract that off of your skin. Okay. Also, you would want to use a chemical resistant apron, just so that if you were ever to get resin on your clothing, it will be safe if it gets on the apron. So you could look those up. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of different kind of ways to find the tools you need on Google. Amazon is a very good fit, but you just don't want to destroy your good clothes when you're doing resin. Also, with the PPE, you want to make sure your ventilation is good. You want to circulate air in your workspace. And examples of that are, you want to work outdoors if you can, depending on the temperature. It might be too hot, might be too cold. The resin is thermal, so the more hot it gets, the faster it cures. So you want to make sure you're not outside in the heat, because it'll cure way faster. And if you guys know about heat flashes and heat curing, yeah, you just don't want to be in a direct sunlight or heat. And if you can't be outdoors, you should open your windows and use the fans to direct the fumes away from your face during curing, because if you guys did not know, epoxy resin does emit fumes as well as UV resin. You want to make sure that you have some kind of circulation in there. I know less resin has a ventilation system that they have to help you circulate air and suck in the toxins, stuff like that. So you just look into that. Also, you want to avoid contamination. Please do not work with resin in areas where you prep your food, or where you prepare your food, or you eat. Your food is consumed. You don't want to do that, because again, we're working with chemicals here. So please do not do that. Also, skin sensitivity, we want to talk about with the gloves. Repeated exposure to the liquid resin, epoxy, UV, whatever, it could cause dermatitis or extreme allergic reactions. That's why gloves are so important. Like I said earlier, just make sure you protect your skin. I do see a lot of times people, when they're doing resin, they don't have gloves on, or they don't have any safety, PPEs. And, at the end of the day, we're all grown. We all do what we want. But I'm just trying to give you some tips and tools to help you along the way to preserve your lungs. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure your health is in pristine condition when you're having fun making your resin. Okay? All right. Also, your surface protection. You want to make sure you're protecting your workspace. When you're doing such things, you want to use silicone mats. Those are a number one thing, because you can let the resin dry off and you can peel off and toss the remaining resin in the trash. We'll talk about disposal afterwards. If you can't have silicone mats, you can use disposable plastic tarps, or like the little plastic tabletop wraps, picnic, you can use that to cover your workspaces. Those are very good and easy to come by. You also want to keep all your materials, your tools, and workspace off limits to children and or pets, because we all know work with chemicals, this is like a science lab. You do not want your children anywhere near your resin workspace, inhaling the same chemicals that you are working with. So you want to make sure it's taped off or in a separate area than where your pets and your children are. I do have a few friends that I know that their pets have consumed resin, because sometimes our pets get into stuff and they just eat stuff. So I do have some friends that pets have eaten resin, and I just don't know how that works for them. But yeah, let's try to keep that to a minimum for our children and our pets. Okay. Epoxy resin, it can be very fun, but I just want to let you know that there's some safety hazards to go along with it. Not trying to scare nobody or run you off or nothing like that, but I just want you to be more safe. Okay. Also, like I stated earlier, please do not pour your epoxy or any kind of resin down the pipelines. That means the toilet, the sink, or the bathtubs. It could damage the pipe system and cause a great deal of damage or destruction, in which you might just have to be liable for paying for if you're a homeowner or you're renting. Nevertheless, if you're renting in an apartment, if you destroy the pipe system and they find out you're the culprit behind it, you probably will have to pay a pretty penny for said thing. So do not pour your resin down the drains at all. It's bad. It's like when you pour oil down the drain, it's clogging and just making it worse for the actual water to get through. So do not dispose of it like that. You just throw it in the garbage bags and throw them outside. Okay, you just mainly wait till the resin cures and then toss it in the trash and toss it out in the trash. Do not flush that down the drains. Okay. I also want to say, with the epoxy resin, like I said earlier, they do release a velocic organic compounds, which are VOCs, volatile. Sometimes these big words just trip me up, and it's okay because I'm learning just like I am with you guys. But yeah, it does emit these VOCs, and the fumes are there's a very distinctive smell to it. It's not really bad, but you know the smell of resin if you're a resin artist. So just be mindful. It does emit fumes, especially it gets worse so when it's flash curing. Sometimes when it flash cures, it does start to smoke. And it could be combustible, which is like flammable. You don't want it to happen, so that's why when you're mixing your ratios of resin 2-to-1, 1-to-1, or 3-to-1, depending on how big or small your project is, you want to make sure that you're mixing the right quantity in the right size container. Silicone cups. If you're mixing a small amount, small cup. Bigger amount, bigger container. So that way you're not constricting the resin to a confined space to where it can't, release the fumes that it is releasing, and you just don't want it to flash cure. Okay. So again, it's flammable. Some of the additives and the solvents are flammable when you're adding it to the resin. So for instance, if you're trying to pop bubbles, because I know this is a big thing in the resin community, trying to pop bubbles, you don't want to spray, we use isopropyl rubbing alcohol to pop bubbles. We spritz, right? You don't want to go behind it with a torch lighter and to get the rest of the bubbles out, because if you guys know Science Class 101, alcohol and fire is flammable, so you do not want to do that in that order. If you're going to use a heat torch or a lighter torch, you want to use the torch first, and then after you let it sit a while, then you go behind it with the alcohol and then you spritz it. You don't want to do the alcohol then the torch, because you're going to set something on fire. So do not do that. We don't want to set anybody's house on fire. Okay. Also the environmental impact of the resin, also improper disposal of resin can harm the ecosystem. Like I said, you don't want it around your pets and your children, and even if it's outdoors, you do not want to just toss it out of the window or just leave it out to where animals can get to it, like the birds or the wildlife animals out there, because birds like to pick up things and put them in their nest, and then they might mistake it for food or something. So you just want to be mindful, like the sea creatures. Don't put plastic in the ocean, because sometimes they think it's a jellyfish or something. So we just have to be mindful of the things that we're doing as humans, because the animals were here first. So we want to just make sure they don't get in contact with the resin and eat it and get sick and stuff like that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the dusting from the sanding. Even when you're done with your resin and you're trying to dome them, there's a strong chance you might have to sand your resin. When you're sanding the resin, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but when you're sanding the resin, there are particles, the dust of resin that's floating through the air. That's why you need your respiratory mask, because it's still floating. Those particles of resin are floating throughout the air, and if you inhale it, it can be very damaging to your lungs as well. So even if you're not mixing and pouring resin and it's cured and you're sanding, you want to be mindful that if you're sanding, it's in the air, you can still inhale it. So yeah, you want to wear your respiratory mask. So pretty much that is it To recap the PPE safety class 101, you want to make sure you have eye protection. You want to make sure you have your respiratory mask. You want to cover your hands with the nitrile gloves. And you want to make sure you have a protective pieces of clothing, which are like your chemical resistant aprons, or just clothes you want to just not care about resin wise. So, and make sure you have good ventilation. I don't want to freak anybody out or scare you guys. Resin could be very, very fun, but also you just want to be safe at the same time. So without further ado, that is it. That is a wrap. I am Uniquely Me Resin. You can find me over on Whatnot, Uniquely Me Resin 32, and also here on YouTube. So please subscribe to my channel. I'm very new to the YouTube channel with the resin community, but hopefully this teaches you guys something. If you have any questions, I'm going to leave it up to you guys to put your questions in the link below, and I can try to help you guys as much as I can. And that's resin safety 101, proper PPE. Until next time, you guys, I will talk to you guys later.